back to Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Business with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me and my friend, Gary. Gary is a business leadership advisor and coach, and his focus is on building world-class companies, not just in the boardroom, but also in the home. And as he's going to talk about today, there's a lot that goes into building a world-class company that impacts quality of life. So we want to make sure that we're doing that the right way. So before I dig in too deep and kind of steal all the thunder, Gary, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Jerry, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you and all your viewers. I'm Gary Rosenstein. I've been very, very fortunate to have had a breadth of a career that is now enabling me to shift and, as Jerry said, provide advisory and coaching services that help people and businesses truly unleash their full potential. I am absolutely fascinated by what prevents people from achieving success. And even when they do, the toll that it takes on their personal life. In my experience, I've had the opportunity to do a wide range of things, leading businesses from different functions, finance, product development, marketing, sales. I've been a CEO, and I've seen firsthand what happens when companies deploy world-class operating strategies and principles to drive better results. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited for our conversation and appreciate the listeners who are tuning in.
We're grateful to have you. You know, one of the things I talk about often in the startup and small business community, we don't typically get the opportunity to work with folks that have the resources, that have the experience that you do. So this is going to be awesome. Now, listeners, Gary and I were talking pre-show when we we're getting set up, and he mentioned something that made me think back to one of my earlier consulting gigs many, many, many moons ago. And we're talking about the lifestyle impact of running a successful company. And one of the things that I always preach to my consulting companies was to understand your exit, understand what you want your company to be when it grows up, because that will inform your decisions. And that's especially important as it relates to your personal life. As we all know, business growth is a marathon with a couple of sprints thrown in there. So if we don't understand what it is that we're trying to achieve as an outcome, it's difficult to make the right decisions. We wind up creating a lot of undue stress, and that has a negative impact on our home. Gary, with that in mind, you know, what type of operational choices and what type of business choices do you make that help you to have that balance or that better personal life so that you're not slave to your office?
Yeah, you know, Jerry, I'll often start a conversation with someone by asking them, are you running your business or is it running you? And first they'll giggle a little bit, as you just did, and then I'll realize that it's nervous laughter because typically they started the business with a dream of accomplishing something. And a lot of people have been very, very successful, but at a significant personal toll. And still many others are still on that journey to achieve that dream. And when you peel away the onion, you find out that these are people who, frankly, they're still working in the business. Their sleeves are rolled up as far as they can go. They're way up to their neck in what they're doing. And they haven't really made the transition to working on the business. And it's fascinating to then have that conversation and say, if you could change things to make them the way you envision them to be, what would they look like? And I love hearing people kind of share that. And then we can talk about, okay, what do we need to do to get you there?
No, that's awesome. It reminds me of the Dr. Stephen Covey 7 Habits mentality of beginning with the end in mind, and that empowering the decisions that you make. But you couldn't be more right. I think I shared with you in a prior conversation, when I would ask companies very often, you know, what's your exit strategy? They'd get upset like I was wasting their time because that wasn't relevant in the conversation. And gosh, I guess I just couldn't disagree anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And Covey was wonderful. I love the with the end in mind. I'll look people in the eye and use Covey's. Look, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And when you
Exactly.
hear that, you go, oh boy. But it's really it's all about focus. Um, and world class companies have the ability to focus, and they start with culture. They create robust winning strategies, and then they have execution plans that are driven by leading KPIs that drive action and accountability. And I'll often hear from people, yeah, but look, I'm not Apple, I'm not Google, I'm not Disney, I'm not Microsoft. So what?
Yeah.
The world class operating principles that make a lot of the most successful companies are all founded based on the Rockefeller habits that many people are very familiar with and are applicable regardless of company size, industry, and competitive environment. And it's wonderful for people to realize that and begin to embrace kind of running their business more effectively.
I love that. You said two things that I love to talk about. Culture, which I think is the most abused buzzword in the world, that yet
Yeah.
somehow doesn't have enough meaningful conversations about it. And then the next one is KPIs. If you can't measure it, you can't control it. And the reality is nearly everything can be measured. You just have to do it the right way. So dealer's choice, since you're the guest you pick, but I'd like to talk about both. Which one would you
Yeah.
rather start with?
Well, let's set the table for culture and just at a high level overview. I mean, it starts with mission or purpose. And to me, that's really why do you exist? And look, in your world and the excellent work that you do around attracting, retaining, motivating, developing people, that is driven by mission and purpose and people's need to truly understand, why am I pouring my time, effort, and energy into this organization? Next is vision. It's very simple. Where are you going? Um, and I like to work with people and think it's good to be grounded in a 3-year outcome statement. And there's very scientific ways to create that and to have something that's tangible and attainable and that's motivating. And then, of course, values. Um, People, whether they're employees, business partners, or customers, are motivated by companies and organizations that share their values. And so many companies where the leader, the entrepreneur, the founder is still working in the business and hasn't really made that shift to working on the business, they haven't grown, they haven't evolved to truly articulate their values and do it in a way that's compelling and motivating to all their stakeholders.
100% agree. Now, dialing back to culture, culture is critical, in my opinion, to make sure that you've got the right people on the ship.
Yeah.
One of the errors I see smaller companies especially make is that CEO, that founder, that president has in their mind a picture of what they believe their company culture is, that alas doesn't resonate with the rest of the company. Where you'd ask anyone else in the company what the culture is, they come up with a different answer. And because of that, they do a poor job in building their employer brand. But that company culture, when you've got the right folks on the ship and they're all rowing the right way, is amazing. When you don't, it reminds me of the old Ben Franklin saying of the fish rots from the head down. And you
Yeah.
just have endless problems. And your point about values and vision, I couldn't agree more. Values, especially, you know, it seems so obvious as we talk about it, and yet I see it so often where it's just not articulated well, and it causes endless problems within the company.
Yeah, it
I
truly
couldn't agree.
does. Yeah, I mean, listen, as they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast every day.
Yes,
I've heard you say, ask yourself the question, why would the best of the best come here? And I'd add to it, why would the best of the best stay here?
yes,
yes, it's about making money. Everybody has to support themselves in what they need to do. But really, what has attracted me to various companies I've worked for and helped me to bring great talent in is the culture and the clarity around the mission, vision, values, the purpose, and making it, more than just a business. Um, these companies where everyone gets up every day to do something that matters are always going to be more successful than their peers who are solely focused on driving top line, cutting costs, and delivering a bottom line. And it catches up with them.
Yeah, you see that so often when a PE firm buys a wildly successful company. The company's culture is amazing. Everyone's rowing in the same direction. Everyone loves to be there. The PE firm buys them, removes every fifth person, downsizes to a smaller office, just absolutely murders that culture, and then the company just does this.
Yep,
Uh,
absolutely.
it's yeah, it's amazing. I can't remember where I read it. Probably on LinkedIn. I spent an embarrassing amount of time there. Somebody
Oh,
said the
we all.
foosballs aren't the foosball tables aren't the culture. That's true, but that there are foosball tables is a part of the culture. I mean, it's not critical, but that the foosball table itself isn't critical, but an environment where something like that exists does make up the nature of that organization.
What's interesting is I think different companies and different life stages and industries can have a very different type cultures. But if you go back to the Rockefeller habits, there are certain components of culture that are relatively common amongst world-class companies. And those components have to do with honesty, integrity, transparency, accountability,
Yep.
a desire and an interest in getting feedback, whether it's from employees or from customers. So if you're doing engagement surveys or you're doing net promoter surveys, and the discipline and the prioritization to act on those things. It's another Covey quadrant 2 principle. The things that are important but not urgent tend to be things that fuel culture because they're going to explode sales in the future, but maybe not have an impact on what happens today or tomorrow.
At risk of this turning into a culture podcast, I'll say one more thing and move on. This is a danger to you folks listening. Gary and I have spoken several times, and we could talk for hours and days about this. But I will say one more thing, kind of making fun of the foosball table. What winds up happening, especially in tech where I spend most of my time, is a company will be wildly successful. And other companies, in an effort to emulate that success, will look at the things that they do without understanding the why and try to just copy them wholesale. So they see that company has a foosball table, and people play that during lunch and like, oh, we need to get a foosball table. No, it's not the foosball table. It's that the people like each other enough to spend their lunch playing at that table. That's the part that matters, not the table.
Yep.
And I think that's why that happens so much. We start to see all the crazy Silicon Valley culture benefits that were really just, lift and shift copies of what they saw in other organizations without the depth of thought to understand what empowered them.
I think you're right on, and it's a good sort of connection point to a final item around culture. And what you're describing is what matters most in life. It's around experiences, relationships, connectivity with others. And when a company exhibits that, the strength of that culture is so much stronger than when you have a bunch of sort of lone wolves out there really just looking after themselves and not thinking about the greater good of what that company's doing and the experiences they're having. Jerry, I think the same is true about us as individuals. I am absolutely fascinated with what prevents leaders, and these could be leaders of large organizations or divisions, or they could be founders or entrepreneurs, but what prevents them from truly having that fulfilling, rewarding experience in their personal life? And I no longer buy the idea that, oh, I'm going to donate 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and then I'm going to go and do the things personally that are important to me for one simple reason. That's not the leader, that's not the culture that other leaders and employees are looking for in today's society and in today's world. And it doesn't have to be that way. You can run your personal life with the same clarity and discipline around what your desired outcomes are, what your priorities are, and how you're going to focus so that whatever it is that you might want time for and to invest in, whether it's personal health, whether it's family, friends, travel, you can do that. And you can integrate your business and your personal life in a way where both can be successful.
I love that. I think part of that problem is the lie that you and I were fed in our generation about retirement. And I don't know that retirement, especially for Gen Z and beyond, is going to exist in the way that it did for our parents. As a matter of fact, I'm fairly certain it won't. I mean, that without getting into politics and the Ponzi scheme that is the Social Security, the mentality of working 60 hours a week until you're 65, 70 years old, and then fishing or camping or whatever, for the rest of your life, it's just an objectively bad model. Number
Yeah.
one, you're giving up your entirety of your healthy, spry, fun years to work, and then when you're past your physical prime, now you're going to do those things. That's just dumb. But even more dumb, we weren't promised tomorrow. It just doesn't. The whole thing doesn't make sense. So to your point, and there's going to be times in business and in all things when you have to sacrifice. But to your point, if we can build our life and our business together so that we're not missing all of these things and delaying that gratitude or delaying that gratification rather to a point that we're probably not going to enjoy it as much as we could, I think that's the stronger model.
I completely agree. And you don't have to. And you're going to be a healthier, happier person and leader in your organization if you are role modeling that you don't have to sacrifice everything personally. In fact, if you run your business like a world-class company, you get efficiencies and greater effectiveness and the results that you're desiring. And guess what? You're probably providing that clarity and that and the tools and resources to your leaders and their teams or your partners and their organizations so that they're more fulfilled and more rewarded. They're probably working harder, smarter, and better for you with you not in their face and in their business every day.
Exactly. And one more thing on this, and we'll move on to
Yeah.
KPIs. So the other part of this that I think gets lost sometimes is that especially in smaller organizations, if you have less than 20 employees, the personality of the founder really becomes the personality of the company. And if that founder is working 7 days a week, frustrated, giving it their all, and then 30% more, their relationship with the employees suffers because number one, employees won't do that. And that creates a level of resentment. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a founder or an owner, and they've just realized that it's Friday and they've got another 3 hours of work they have to do. And then the employee comes in at lunch and says, I need to leave 2 hours early. And they realize that 3 hours of more work they have to do just became 4. And yeah, exactly. And they lose their mind. When the reality is, while I can appreciate what they're feeling, they're largely creating the problem and how they're structuring things, with the caveat that sometimes things happen, especially in small business. Sometimes you do have to make the sacrifice. But if that's the norm, then you're making a mistake.
Absolutely. And you got to be able to adjust. It's just like the sports team that thinks they lost the game because of the call in the last 30 seconds. Well, if they had been up by 2 scores, the call in the last 30 seconds wouldn't have mattered. So
Exactly. Great analogy.
it's important. But yeah, as we said, look, when you have clarity around your culture, then you can motivate that team and you can involve that team in creating a strategy that is taking into consideration the industry that you're playing in, the competitive set, the marketplace, the economics, and is structured and is robust enough that you're going to win even if things occur differently than maybe what's predicted or forecasted. That's a conversation for another day. KPIs, though, they are critical in today's organizations. And there are a lot of companies that have embraced KPIs. In my opinion, there are few who have embraced them correctly and who use them in a way that is most effective. So first and foremost, KPIs need to be leading KPIs. These need to be measurements that truly tell you, are you on track to delivering whatever those outcomes are? Think budget, think commitments to your private equity firm, think commitments to yourself or your family or your board. They need to be specific, they need to be measurable, and they need to be something that occurs on an interval that's clear. Is it something you can look at daily, weekly, monthly, or do you have to wait and look at it once a year? Companies need to write KPIs in a way that they're unambiguous and people can understand and know what they're accountable for. And the key for me, and I'm curious what you've seen in sort of your world, is the KPIs are what drive the priorities and the action items and not the other way around. You know, I really work to say, if you're doing something, tell me what KPI that action, that priority, that accountability is going to influence. And if you can't, then there's a very, very good chance that you might be better off spending your time on something else.
Before we dig into that, I'm sorry. Just for people who aren't aware, it's a pretty common term, but just for people who aren't aware, key performance indicators. Could you
Yeah.
give folks a
KPI.
couple examples of just basic KPIs, just to kind of give them an idea of where you're going with this? And I suspect most people will be familiar, but just in case.
Yeah, you know, thanks for that. We get into the vernacular and don't take a pause
Jargon.
there. Look, there are actually 6 KPIs that are foundational for all companies. 3 of them have to do with revenue. So you look at what is your top line revenue, and you got to look at that in terms of total revenue in. Second is, what is that churn in that revenue? And not just as a percentage of the revenue, but where's it coming from? And so if there's churn, is it through customers? Is it through seasonality? What's driving it? And the third thing is concentration. So many companies, and particularly if a listener or viewers worried or interested in the valuation of their company, they miss that there's a high concentration of revenue in one relationship. And if you go to a bank and you're looking to borrow money or get valued or do some sort of buyout, and over 20% of your revenue comes from a single source, your valuation will be significantly reduced. The other 3 that I almost always look at are EBITDA or burn for a startup, employee engagement, which ought to be music to your ears, and pipeline. Those 6 are foundational for almost every company that operates.
And for pipeline, do you mean, I'm assuming, sales pipeline?
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
know, I think I told you this story before, but many years ago, I had a client that was a technology staffing firm. They were a decent sized company, if memory serves, around a $20 million revenue company. But 80% of that 20 million came from Microsoft.
Oh,
They were literally one director of HR change away from being going from, a $20 million company to a $4 million company.
yeah.
And I asked the owner, I'm like, how do you sleep at night? He's like, I do not.
Well, you almost look at that and you say, so what is it that Microsoft, truly loves about what they're getting, and how can that be offered and provided to other organizations? 80% is severe.
Yeah,
They're,
it's the
they're
worst I've ever seen.
It's the worst I've ever heard. But pipeline is really interesting. There's just tried and true ways to measure pipeline, and a lot of companies. Let's say you're trying to get to $1 million quarterly in sales or $10 million quarterly in sales. You really have to look at what's your conversion rate and what's the typical timing for conversion and run the formula, because you might be a company that has $4 million in pipeline to generate $1 million a quarter, and that's just fine. Or you might have a really long lead and low conversion type of service or product, and you might need 20 million to get $1 million to pop out every quarter. And it's very eye-opening to run those numbers and then create from that the accountability and the action plans, which starts to span then the traditional functional roles that exists in historical organizational structure. And this is a very interesting point. KPIs can be a way of truly driving that collaboration and breaking down silos of typical functionally structured organizations when the leaders suddenly realize they're jointly accountable for KPIs that are critical to the long-term success of the company, and they need to work together to make it happen.
It's very interesting when you're talking about pipeline. At a micro level, when I used to run sales teams, I would go through the same exercise with salespeople. We'd look at whatever, goal we gave them, whatever nut they had to crack. We would break that goal out by, whatever the close rate that salesperson had, or if they're too new, whatever the average company's close rate was, size of deal, sales velocity, how quickly things move through the pipeline. And we'd break it all the way down to the activities they needed to do based on averages to succeed. And a couple of really important things happened. Number one, it became very real for that salesperson. They could see, because we showed them the math, what they had to do to get what they needed. Second, once they kind of wrapped their brain around that and started to succeed, we could teach them how to lever things. Look, if you improve your close rate by X%, you do this much less. Or if you increase your number of client visits, that acts as a multiplier. We could show them these things, and you would watch the salesperson's mind explode. I can almost envision you working with a CEO and doing something very similar and getting a similar outcome.
Yeah, absolutely, Jerry. And I'm going to put an actual name to what you just described that listeners can go tomorrow and do with their teams. I call it solving for the delta. And so what's the delta?
I love that.
Pick a KPI. It can be employee engagement. It can be a pipeline number. It can be revenue. It can be an expense metric. Just pick one that you're not hitting and quantify the delta or the difference between where you are today and what your target is for that KPI, and quantify it with your team. And then it's a fascinating thing about the brain. The brain can only solve a problem that it's specifically asked to solve. So ask yourself, your leadership team, why do we have this delta? And what specifically do we need to do to change it? This is a world-class company operating principle. When you say it, it actually sounds overly simplistic, and it's one of those, well, of course, this is what you would do. So few companies actually will step back and solve for the delta. And what you just described, and I love the way you laid it out, turn a small group loose, not for weeks, not for days, not even necessarily for hours. Say, you have 30 minutes, solve for that delta, come back to the team and tell us what's causing this gap, what specifically do we need to do to close it, and who do we think should be responsible for each of those items. And what you've just then created is level 2 KPIs. So, a C-suite group, or in a small company, the handful of people that are running the company, they should only have a half a dozen, maybe 8, 9 at most KPIs. But their teams then could, coming out of this exercise, have very specific level 2 KPIs that they can then be held accountable for. So if you're watching and you're thinking, oh, wow, there's a KPI that we just can't seem to make, solve for the delta with your team tomorrow, put it to work. You'll be really, really happy with the clarity of the action items and the level 2 KPIs that come out of that exercise.
And what you just said really demonstrates the interconnectedness of all of these things. So, what keeps most CEOs, founders, and early stage leaders up at night is the delta, is the unknown, is the change, is the difference. Unless my classical Greek nerdery is failing me, delta is difference, right?
Yeah.
Difference or change. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that difference, that unknown quantity is what keeps people up at night. But when you break things down, like I described the sales team and like Gary's describing now, it takes that away. You understand what you need to do to achieve your goal. And even if it gets more refined, and spoiler alert, it will, even if it gets more refined as you dig into it, you now have an actionable plan to follow. And fear and uncertainty, they're kissing cousins for a reason. When you take away the uncertainty, the fear has a difficult time standing on its own.
Absolutely. And it's amazing what we just did. We just showed that creating a set of KPIs that people have commitment, transparency to, and alignment to, understanding where there's deltas in those KPIs, empowering your leader or your leaders to go and solve for the deltas and create action plans. And then guess what happens? They're bought in. They're all in. They're going to work harder, happier, and more effectively. And that leader that we started off talking about, who needs to shift from working in the business to working on the business, can step away at this point from the process and become an advisor, a coach, a mentor to that group. And yes, get in when there's problems or challenges or barriers that need to be overcome that they're struggling with. But for the most part, let them do their thing. You're going to get to better results and more time as a leader to focus on other things that are important to you, whether they be other business priorities or personal priorities. So the whole thing has just come full circle.
It's excruciatingly obvious that we're going to be doing this again. But I'd like to say one more thing before we start to wind up. And it's so important to say. You said something earlier. You said this is really simple. This appears really simple. That's one of the most important things to understand about business. Most of what we do isn't complicated at all. It's just about understanding and breaking it down into pieces that make sense. And one of the things you said again that's chief in that, and I want you all to take away from this: the KPIs Gary described are forward-looking. The reason that's so important, and I'm going to just change the wording, is it's giving you the ability to impact the future. Trailing KPIs aren't unimportant, but they've already passed. You're documenting success or failure. But with forward-looking KPIs, you're able to impact the future. I talk about that when I talk about the difference between a micromanager and active manager. A micromanager hangs out and documents failure. An active manager is forward-looking and ensuring that you're on track so you're going to get the success you're looking for. That's what this is right here. Anything you'd like to add to that, Gary?
No, you nailed it. And it goes all the way back to the Rockefeller habits. And I think it's extremely important that forward-looking KPIs be chosen for exactly what you said. They enable true accountability, which then drives action, which accelerates with speed your ability to impact results.
Well, that's awesome. Well, listen, you have shared a wealth of knowledge, and spoiler alert, folks, we truly did just touch the tops of the mountain peaks. Gary has an enormous amount more depth to add. We're obviously going to have you back on the show at this point, whether you like it or not.
I'm happy. This has been fantastic, Jerry.
No, thank you very much. Between now and then, though, talk a little bit more about the services you provide and where people can reach you to learn more about this and how they can apply it to their own companies.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Jerry said he's going to throw this in the show notes, so no need to grab the
Yes.
pen. But the best way to get a hold of me is just through email at grosenstein@inflectionptstrategies.com or on my LinkedIn. Again, both of those will be in the show notes. I operate a business advisory and leadership team coaching practice that's focused in part on what we've discussed today. It's really about helping people and businesses unleash their full potential. I'm very fortunate and have a lot of gratitude for the career that I've had and the range of positions and different types of companies, from large Fortune 100 to even startup and private equity based companies. My last role was as CEO of a large senior care and health and wellness company. So I've seen that last phase of life and how people reflect on the choices and the decisions they made. And I'd be delighted to talk with anyone about your situation, your company, and how I might be able to help.
That sounds awesome. And as you heard here, he's got really actionable, useful information. So I strongly recommend you to reach out. And I'm not joking; he'll be back on the show soon. I promise you that, because I feel like we're at the first 5% of the conversation, and we're 35 minutes in. So let's use this as our wrap up point. Thank you again for being on the program, Gary. For
My
everybody else,
pleasure.
thanks for listening. You guys go out there, make something awesome. Tune in next week where we'll talk about more exciting things to help you, your startups, your early stage businesses and small businesses to thrive. In the interim, check out destinationemployer.co and look at our program, the Destination Employer Program, so you're able to consistently attract, recruit, retain the top talent in your marketplace, and most importantly, lead them to high performance. That's really the most important part of the whole program. But regardless, I'll see you again in a week. And again, don't forget to be awesome.